in just a minute we'll have a prayer. I'm going to ask Chris. I meant to talk to him ahead of time. But we're now up to 1 Corinthians chapter 11, believe it or not. And we're entering into some pretty difficult material that brethren have wrestled with for a long time. And I'm losing my voice. Who wants to take this class for me? Nobody wants this class. Well, we'll try to get through it, and hopefully we'll come out well on the other side. Let's all bow in prayer as Chris leads us.
Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day, Lord. Lord, we ask you that you help our hearts and our minds to your word. We ask that you take from the example of the early church that had the problems that many of them we have today, and we should study that and learn those to how to deal with the problems that we have today. I ask that you be with Brother Dick this morning as he brings that message to us, and ask that you be with us to open our hearts to it, apply it, and be better Christians, better people in our communities. And thank you so much for your Son, Jesus Christ. And it's in his name we pray.
Amen.
Amen.
And thank you for the prayer on my behalf. As I mentioned, this is a difficult passage, and it's one that brethren have wrestled with for a long time. In fact, the next 4 chapters have some difficulties that are not easily explained, at least not as much so as some of the other things we've talked about. We will be approaching the covering question of chapter 11 from the standpoint that Paul is regulating a Christian's behavior as it relates to local customs. And so that's what we're talking about this morning. And we'll be mentioning from that standpoint. And it may be hard for us to understand because the Corinthians had some customs that we don't have today. But let's take a look at these first few verses. In fact, it covers about the first 16 verses of chapter 11. And so we'll just read through those. I'm reading from the American Standard Version. And we mentioned last week that verse 1 seems to go more with chapter 10 than it does chapter 11. But we'll go ahead and begin with it. Be imitators of me, even as I also am of Christ. Now I praise you that you remember me in all things and hold fast the traditions even as I delivered them to you. But I would have you know that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of the woman is the man, and the head of Christ is God. Every man praying or prophesying, having his head covered, dishonoreth his head. But every woman praying or prophesying with her head unveiled, dishonoreth her head. For it is one and the same, as if she were shaven. For if a woman is not veiled, let her also be shorn. But if it is a shame for a woman to be shorn or shaven, let her be veiled. For a man indeed ought not to have his head veiled, for as much as he is the image and glory of God, but the woman is the glory of the man. For the man is not of the woman, but the woman is of the man. For neither was the man created for the woman, but the woman for the man. For this cause might the woman to have a sign of authority on her head, because of the angels. Nevertheless, neither is the woman without the man, nor the man without the woman in the Lord. For as the woman is of the man, so is the man also by the woman, but all things are of God. Judge ye in yourselves, is it seemly that a woman pray unto God unveiled? Doth not even nature itself teach you that if a man have long hair, it is a dishonor to him? But if a woman have long hair, it is glory to her, for her hair is given for her for a covering. But if any man seemeth to be contentious, we have no such custom, neither the churches of God. Okay, there it is. Let's go to the next chapter. No. We're going to try to get through this. I believe there's some benefit, a lot of benefit in this passage, even though it's regulating a Corinthian custom and teaching us how to adjust to whatever customs may be true in the culture in which we live. But following the example of Jesus when he addressed the 7 churches of Asia over in the book of Revelation, Paul also chooses to praise whatever he can find that's praiseworthy. And That's always a commendable thing to do. He chose to praise and commend Christians, the Corinthian Christians, for what he could. And so he begins in that second verse where he says, "Now I praise you that you remember me in all things and hold fast the traditions even as I delivered them unto you." That was something commendable that Paul found that he could praise. And I believe that when people are praised, they'll more rapidly receive instruction and more readily receive instruction and also direction. And so Paul will have some negative things later in this chapter. There will be some negative things. But it begins on a positive note by praising the church at Corinth. If you thought that the church at Corinth was so bad that there was nothing in it to be praised, you would be mistaken. Paul found some things to praise. And if you thought that they were so bad that there was nothing at all that he could say good about them, Paul would disagree with that. He was far from giving up hope on the Corinthians. We want to keep that in mind. And I think we see that in every chapter. Although he's dealing with various issues that are facing that church, and they had more than probably anybody in history, he was far from giving up on them, and he never even hints at giving up on them. And I like that. And so we try to follow that example as well. Now, what is it that Paul praises in this second verse? What's he praising? Okay, that they keep, and my translation says traditions, yours says ordinances, yeah, same thing. Traditions can be either good or bad, can't they? Traditions of men, no. But things that have been, the word tradition just means to hand it down. And the things that have been handed down from God, they're called traditions too, and they're good ones. But those traditions that originate with men are not. Which one is Paul commending here? The good ones, right? So he praises them for that. And he says, but that hold fast the tradition even as I delivered them to you. And he delivered them, someone gave them to Paul, and it was the Holy Spirit. And so those are good traditions. And chapter 11 seems to be Paul's response to the affirmation that they were trying to remember what Paul told them. The traditions, the ordinances, as some translations say. Anybody translations say anything other than traditions or ordinances? Okay, I think that pretty well tells us what these were. Now, and let me put the questions up here. I meant to do that. Okay. The second question here, in the next few verses, the word head is used 9 times in 2 different ways. And so that can get a little confusing. Which head is he talking about? I believe we can decipher all that. And what are those 2 usages of the word head?
Leadership and coverings of your head.
Okay. The head, the physical head itself, right? And then and then also,
Leadership.
yeah, the headship of authority. And he spends a good bit of time talking about that. And so the part of one's anatomy, our physical head, is one thing that's mentioned here. But then also a higher position of headship or of authority. And he gives us that order of authority. Anybody that's ever been connected in any way to the military understands this principle of headship. You start out as a private or as a seaman if you're in the Navy, whatever, you're a recruit. And then you advance, hopefully, over the years, and you go up the ranks. That doesn't mean, for example, in the Army, that a general is more of a human than a private is. They may try to make the private feel like he's not a human, some of the things they do to you in boot camp. But the private is every much a human as a general is. But they have different stations in life. They have different orders of headship. We can understand that. And we have that principle stated here in these verses. So, what is the order here? God is the head of Christ. Christ is the head of man. Man, head of the woman. Okay, that's the order that he gives there. That doesn't mean that Christ is less deity than the Father is. They're both deity. It doesn't mean that man is less of a human than Jesus was when he was on the earth. Jesus is the only being that was both God and man. Man is not less of a human than Jesus was when he was human. Woman is not less of a human than man is. They're all human. They have different roles that God has given them. God doesn't love men more than he does women. There are some orders like this that we can make this point on. We are taught to submit to the government authorities, aren't we? That doesn't mean we're less humans than they are. We're just as much human as they are. It doesn't mean God loves the presidents and governors more than he does the rest of us. And the same thing is true in society or in the family. God doesn't love the fathers more than he loves the children. He doesn't love the husband more than he loves the wife. It's not talking about that at all. It's just talking about roles that God has given them, and he gives the reason for those roles beginning back in Genesis. So the order is God is the head of Christ, Christ is the head of man, man's the head of woman. What does this imply about headship? What's it imply? We need to respect it, don't we? And we kind of see that getting all confused today, even in our society, with all the things that are going on. But particularly, we're to respect that headship and authority. Paul is regulating some things that were taking place in the assembly, and there were two things mentioned. What are the two things mentioned? Praying and prophesying. Those are the two things. Now, a lot of people want to apply it to a whole lot of other things besides that, but those are the two things mentioned. And so we'll stick with what it says. Praying to God and prophesying to man. That's the way that works. So how did the cultural norms regarding the head covering in Corinth influence Paul's instructions? He's dealing with a custom that existed in Corinth. And the reason we know it existed, he wouldn't be regulating it if it hadn't already been. Paul's not instituting it. It's already been there. He's just regulating what was already there and getting them to recognize that.
Was that not all the pictures we've ever seen, the men and the women wore something on their head all the time when they were in, just out in society, and women, especially. So was that what he was talking about? And two, that custom, but yet when you come in the assembly, it's going to be different?
Yeah, he's talking about something that happens when you're praying and prophesying. He's not trying to regulate what everybody's doing, although we should respect whatever customs exist in our culture, our society, as long as it doesn't violate something that God has already regulated that we don't need to be doing. And that could happen, but that's not the kind of thing he's talking about here. And so how did these cultural norms regarding head coverings in Corinth influence Paul's instruction? And that brings us to the next question. Is the fact that someone is the head over us, does that degrade us in any way? No, we're not talking about that, are we? But a lot of times that's misunderstood, and people have level charges against the Bible because they think that's what it's talking about. It isn't. It's not degrading anybody. One's value or worth is not under discussion in these passages. So we need to dismiss that as though if that were it. So we all are highly valued, aren't we? The value of us was seen at the cross, wasn't it? That's how much we were valued. That Christ would come and die for every one of us, no matter what our background is, no matter what family we're in or what nationality, ethnic group we are. He did that for every one of us. Now then, let's look at the fourth question. And the fourth question is, discuss which head is being referred to in verse 4. Look at verse 4. Every man praying or prophesying, having his head covered, dishonoreth his head. Got the word head used twice there, haven't we?
I think he's talking about leadership right here.
Okay, and first of all, he's talking about the physical head, and kind of along with this, in what ways does Paul use the creation to explain gender roles in public worship? We're going to see that when we get down to verses 8 and 9. And it's kind of hard to not connect these verses, even though they're a few verses apart. Verse 8 and 9, for the man is not of the woman, but the woman is of the man. For neither was the man created for the woman, but the woman for the man. So he's referring back to creation there. And there's something we learn way back there from creation about this. And it comes into play in various places, especially in the New Testament. We see it again in chapter 14. We see it again in 1 Timothy chapter 2 regarding the roles of men and women. And the reason why he says that a woman is not to teach or usurp authority over a man was not because this is what's going on in the culture, but because of what happened at the beginning, doesn't he? He goes back to the very beginning, that man was created first. God has always given priority he's always given priority to order or to headship, like the firstborn got the most blessing. And so he's always given special blessings and responsibilities. It wasn't cultural. It goes all the way back to the beginning, before there really was much of a culture developing, that man was created first and then woman. And so he gave priority to the first. And that was a reason given. We may not understand all that involved in that, but that doesn't keep us from seeing that that's the reason the Bible gives for that. Second reason was that woman was deceived, man was not. And we can get into all that, but it's not necessarily bragging on man, because that means Adam went into it with his eyes wide open, didn't he? He wasn't deceived. He knew what was going on, but he did it anyway. But she was deceived, and because of that, God decided that man was best suited for headship. Not because he went to it with his eyes wide open, but because he wasn't deceived. So getting that out of the way, let's notice, and we've raised the question here, which head is being referred to in verse 4. First of all, his physical head, and we pointed out that God gave priority. Now, connecting that to number 5, first discuss the covering of verse 5, and to which head does it refer? Okay, verse 5, but every woman praying or prophesying with her head unveiled dishonoreth her head, for it is one and the same, as if she were shaven. Okay, again, her physical head, isn't it? That's what was veiled. It's not talking about veiling her husband, but talking about her physical head. And the word covering here, kalupto, means to hang down. So it literally covered. What we see in some of the dress in the Muslim countries probably better describes what was taking place there than what we often see today. And so we have in the American Standard Version and the New American Standard Version, instead of covering, we have veiled and unveiled. And King James, we have the word covering and some other. So what is being described here would be similar to what is called the hijab, Hijab, among the Muslims, a scarf around the head, covering the head. It was similar to what is being worn by many Muslim women today, covering the head and the neck. Some wear a niqab, N-I-J-A-B, and a veil for the face that covers around the eyes, keeping the eyes clear, but covers the nose and mouth. And some wear what's called a burqa. Those are the three kinds of clothing that women wear. And most of it is totally concealing. And so these were all the kinds of veils. It covered the face and body as one piece. And there was just a little bit of mesh right up here. You've seen pictures of them wearing the burqa. Just a little bit of mesh up here where they could see out. And the covering of chapter 11 of 1 Corinthians literally covered the head and would not describe most hats that are worn by women today. And women aren't wearing hats much like they used to. When I was growing up in church, nearly all the women wore a hat. That was a custom at that time. Not so much a custom now, is it? It may be in some religions. We see that in a few religions today of women wearing hats. So, and that leads us into our next question. What was the significance of the woman being covered and the man uncovered? That's verses 6 and 7. Let's look at it. Verse 6, for if a woman is not veiled, let her also be shorn. But if it is a shame for a woman to be shorn or shaven, let her be veiled. For a man indeed ought not to have his head veiled, for as much as he is the image and glory of God, but the woman is the glory of man. So what was indicated by the covering there at Corinth?
Man needed to honor God and the woman needed to honor man.
Okay, it indicated subjection, didn't it? It indicated that. If a man wore a veil, it would indicate that he was subject to someone else besides Christ. That's what that would signify. And that's what's said in verse 7. But the veil had some significance in this New Testament era, particularly at Corinth, that it doesn't presently have in the United States. I think we understand that principle. We've got to apply it as well. If we had similar customs, the same would apply to us. I had on down in my notes, I'll go ahead and mention it here. Some of you are old enough maybe to remember, back in 1979, when President Carter was our president, he made a trip to Saudi Arabia, and his wife Rosalind went with him. It was the custom there for the woman to walk behind the man, and she did that. Well, what did the press do to her? They criticized her. What did the National Organization of Women do to her? They criticized her for doing that. I believe she did the right thing. That was the custom there, and she did that. We don't go trying to say, well, we're going to enforce United States customs on these countries. No, we go and respect their customs as long as they don't involve us in anything that's wrong. And so I believe she did the right thing. I believe those organizations were wrong to criticize her for doing that. And so I think we can understand more how this would affect us, how it would apply to us. If I go to some foreign country, I'm not going to say, well, you've got to abide by our customs over there in the United States. No, we can't do that. So that kind of brings us to a discussion. All of a sudden, it seems like something's injected in here that you wonder, what in the world has that got to do with it? And that's the angels. Notice how the angels seem to be injected into this. Let's look at it in verse 6 and 7, or verse 7. I haven't got to there. Yeah, verse 10. For this cause ought the woman to have a sign of authority on her head because of the angels. That's a hard part of this. There are, I think, two possible reasonable explanations. But does anybody have any ideas why are angels mentioned here? Hear what you've got to say about it first. What would angels have to do with this? What do angels know? Are angels aware of what's going on here on the earth? They are. How do we know? How do we know? Because the angels rejoice every time a sinner is converted, doesn't he? We're told that. So the angels are aware of what's going on here. That may be one reason. Angels are witnesses to what transpires here on earth, and it would be recognized, any violation of God's word would be recognized if women didn't submit to her role. So the angels are able to rejoice when a sinner repents. They're aware of what's going on here. That's one possible reason. We're told that in Luke 15, where Jesus begins the three parables about the lost coin, the lost sheep, and the lost son. And then we had it reference to this back in chapter 4 of 1 Corinthians. We didn't make any comments about it back then, but look at verse 9 of chapter 4. For I think God has set forth us, the apostles, last of all, as men doomed to death, for we are made a spectacle unto the world, both to angels and to men. Angels were aware of what was happening to the apostles when they were being made a spectacle to the world. So angels are aware of what's going on here. Is that a plausible reason why angels are mentioned here? What do you think? I believe it is. I believe it's a plausible reason. Now, there's also a second possibility here of what's meant by angels. I'm not going to be dogmatic about either one of these, but I'm mentioning to you. The second one is that Paul is reminding them of what happened to wicked angels who refused to recognize and accept the place of God assigned to them, and so as not to commit a similar sin that the angels have committed. And we have references to that, a couple of references. One's over in the book of Jude, only one chapter in Jude, verse 6. And notice what's said there in verse 6. And angels that kept not their own principality, but left their proper habitation, he hath kept in everlasting bonds unto darkness, unto the judgment of the great day. So there's a second possibility why angels are mentioned, and that is Paul is reminding us of what happened to wicked angels that didn't keep their place, that didn't understand their place. And another similar reference to it in 2 Peter, and chapter 4 and verse 2. Chapter 4 and verse, I'm in the wrong, it has to be 1 Peter, chapter 4. Okay, that's not the verse. I've put the wrong verse down. See if I can find it here. Well, I just read it recently in Peter, but I don't see it now. Reference to angels. Well, we'll look it up. We'll find it next week. But at least twice we have a reference to angels that are going to be judged for not keeping their place, for not keeping their proper place. And so here are two possible reasons why angels are mentioned. I believe both of them are plausible. I'm not sure which one it is. And who knows? Maybe it's both. I don't know. But one of them is that angels are witnesses to what transpires here on earth, and they would be aware of any violation if God's woman didn't submit to her role. And also because Paul is reminding them of what happened to the wicked angels, the rebellious angels who refused to recognize their role. So those are two plausible, reasonable reasons why angels would be mentioned here. Anybody disagree with that or got another idea why they might be mentioned? We're willing to listen to those. Do those make sense? Anybody? Okay, I believe they do. Yes, Nola?
I think that verse you'll be looking for is 2 Peter 2, verse 4.
And verse what?
4.
Okay, I had the wrong chapter down. Let's look at it. 2 Peter 2 and verse 4. Yes, that's it. For if God spared not the angels when they sinned, but cast them down to hell and committed them to pits of darkness. So there are two places, 2 Peter and also Jude, that tell us what happened to angels that did not keep their proper habitation, did not keep their proper place. And so that's a reasonable explanation as to why angels will be mentioned here in connection with our subject on the covering. Okay, now then we want to look at, we've already discussed this, what was the significance of the woman being covered and the man uncovered, and what did the order of creation have to do with it? We've already pointed that out. Let's look at number 7 here. What is the significance of verses 11 and 12? Let's go back to 1 Corinthians chapter 11. Verse 11 and 12. Nevertheless, neither is the woman without the man, nor the man without the woman in the Lord. For as the woman is of the man, so is the man also by the woman, but all things are of God. Okay, there's a lot packed into those two little verses there about this. First of all, man shouldn't think of himself as independent of woman, should he? That's one thing to make clear here. He's not independent of woman. He's not better than her. That's not saying that. Paul shows that there is an interdependence, doesn't he? Isn't that what he's showing? An interdependence here. Not that one is sufficient by itself. And so neither one could exist alone, could they? And certainly originally, woman came from man, but since then, every man comes from a woman. Think about that. Paul's giving us a lot to think about here, isn't he? But it takes a man for a woman to produce another human. We understand that. And so the spiritual order does not differ here as well. Both man and woman need each other. We understand that. Neither is independent because God arranged it that way. It's the way God arranged it.
Man and woman and male and female.
Yeah.
And there's two genders.
How did we all get here? We got here through a woman, didn't we? Every one of us. Okay, so neither is independent because God arranged it that way, and God has tied them together so that they cannot survive without the other. Isn't that true? I believe it is. It's true. Now then, that's another reason that man shouldn't think too highly of himself. He shouldn't think too highly. Although she came from man, God was her creator, not man. Man did not create woman. God did. And she's to realize that subjection doesn't prove inferiority in any way. That is not the subject here, inferiority. Christ is not inferior to the Father. He willingly accepted a place of subjection. That's what Philippians 2 is about. He willingly submitted himself. He thought it not robbery to be equal with God, the Bible says. But he lowered himself, became a human being, he became one of us. And it wasn't a matter of him not being equally deity. And so she's to realize that subjection doesn't prove inferiority at all. That's not what he's talking about. Christ is not inferior to the Father. Both are deity. Jesus willingly, I want to emphasize that, willingly subjected himself to the Father. And we are to live with God's arrangement, however that finds us. So it doesn't mean that he loves men more than he does women. Now then, let's look at verse 8, because this is getting into more things that will help us to understand. When Paul says, judge ye yourselves, and look at it in verse 13, judge ye in yourselves, is it seemly that a woman pray to God unveiled? Now, this verse, I think, is going to show us that he's talking about a custom, not some kind of law for all time to come to the end of the world, that women are to wear coverings and so forth. Judge ye in yourself. Would Paul say that about fornication? Judge ye yourselves. Is it comely? Is it seemly? Would he say that about stealing? Is it seemly? No, we've already told that's wrong. We don't have to judge whether it's seemly. It's wrong, isn't it? But he's talking about something that we can judge. And they could judge, looking at their society, whether this was seemly, whether it was appropriate, comely, as some translations say. It doesn't sound like Paul is binding upon all women of all time to come the practice of a covering. He's asking them to judge. He doesn't ask us to judge whether fornication is a sin, does he? He tells us it is. He doesn't ask us to judge whether stealing is a sin. It is. But here's something that we can judge. We can all look at the culture in which we live, and we can judge some things about it. So Paul didn't say it's uncomely that a woman pray uncovered. He told them to judge the comeliness of it, didn't he? See the difference? Paul didn't say it's uncomely. He told us to judge whether it is. And they could look at their society and tell that. They could answer that question. And the difference is that one is in the Bible and the other was not. And so, not the kind of language for a law that was going to last till the second coming to judge you whether it's comely or not. Yes, Jim?
Well, I think what we have to realize too here, though, is he's comparing Corinthian society also. And they had to keep that in mind because, you know, the pagan priestesses and priests dressed and acted a certain way. You know, their worship was vile. I don't want to get into it, but, you know, some of the priestesses would shave their heads. You know, female priestesses, you know. Some of the male priests likely had long hair for appearing effeminate. All right, so if we look at that, then we're like, oh, well, we wouldn't want one of our members to be confused with one of them, would we? So I think that's where he's saying you got to judge. Just as today, would we want our manner of dress or anything about us indicate that we are a person of the world and not a person of the church? And I think that's why he says, judge you among yourselves. Societal norms are a certain way. You know, in India, the men wear their hair long. They don't cut it. They wrap it up in a turban. That's why they have turbans. But, you know, would we necessarily consider them effeminate? No. We understand that. It's going to vary in certain cultures. Some things vary, but are those, what we have to ask is does that indicate that you're a Christian, or does it indicate you're a child of the world? You know, I think that's what he's trying to say here is judge you. You know, how are people going to perceive you?
Well, I believe that's right. What you're saying is true. Let's keep in mind he's talking about two things, praying and prophesying. He's not talking about other things. He's talking about those two things. Apparently these were things that were going on, of course, in the assembly, they would be, and so it would apply there especially. But the idea of being comely means becoming, seemly, appropriate. Paul did not say that it's uncomely for a woman to pray uncovered. He told them to judge whether it was or not. See the difference? Paul didn't say it. He told them to judge whether it was. Somebody else? Thought I heard somebody else. Okay. Well, the difference is that we mentioned the one's in the Bible, the other's not. It's not the kind of language that he would use to talk about something that's going to last forever, but of a custom. And the verse shows that it was a custom. And I'm not saying that headship was a custom. That's not what we're saying here. Headship goes back to the beginning, doesn't it? That's solid. That's there. But he's regulating something by which that was recognized. And if that's not the case, then they wouldn't have any basis of judging whether it was comely or not. If they had never seen it before, how can you judge whether it's comely if they've never seen it? It was already a custom. Paul is not instituting a custom. He's regulating a custom that already existed. And so they wouldn't be able to judge it if they'd never seen it before, whether it was comely or not. How do we know whether it's comely? We've never seen this before. Is that clear? Understand?
But it used to be common in a lot of congregations for women to have, a scarf on their head. It used to be, but it's not so common anymore, so we don't think anything of it.
Right. So Paul is regulating what in any society you may find yourself, recognizing those distinctions. And pretty well throughout history, every society has recognized a distinction between men and women. We've had the privilege of visiting, I forget how many, several foreign countries, maybe 15 or so, and that never was a problem distinguishing in the way people dress, even though some cases they may wear some robes or things like that. There wasn't any problem distinguishing the two, male and female. But Paul wasn't instituting that. And so judging the comeliness of it had to be based on one's customary usage. And man's ability to recognize sin comes from the Word of God. We understand that. His judgment as to whether the thing is comely Paul would not have asked them to judge that if it was comely, if it was a sin. So let's understand the difference between something that may be a shame and something that may be a sin. What's the difference there? All sin is shameful, but all shame is not sin, is it? What did the apostles do? They rejoiced that they were able to suffer shame for the cause of Christ. Can you substitute the word sin there? No. So all shame is not sin, but all sin is a shame. We can say it that way. The shame had to do with the judgment of people. So as we think about that, whether or not it was comely would be unimportant about stealing or fornication or adultery or anything, since it's already wrong. Doesn't matter whether it's comely or not, it's wrong. But Paul didn't ask the Corinthians to judge whether a woman sinned by praying uncovered, but whether she was comely in doing that. So the passage speaks of judging the comeliness, not judging the sinfulness of it. Anybody comments on that? They're judging the comeliness, not the sinfulness of it. Well, man learns to live in society by learning the customs of that society. And to a great degree, we accept those customs with little or no alteration on our part, especially in everyday usage, such as table manners, posture, in eating, the utensils used, and all. There may be some places where you go where it's more custom to eat with chopsticks than it is with a spoon and a fork and a knife.
Brother Dick, Christians are all over the world, so
Yeah.
every different area has different customs, and so they have to, they've got to be Christians, but, they can't do the customs of that.
And I believe that's one of the things, yeah, right. Paul was talking about when he became all things to all men. He didn't try to enforce his Jewish customs on people, especially when Paul went to Athens. Those men of Athens, they were all heathens. He didn't try to enforce Jewish customs on them. And the same with, well, our time is about up. Our time is up. Let's mark our places there, and we'll come back and talk about that some more next week, and that will be the 15th, right?